Welcome to the Forex and CFD Market Focus Report for Monday, October 7, 2013. Let's go ahead and take a look at our calendar for today. We saw a move higher in the Australian Performance of Construction Index, and we saw Japanese foreign reserve assets increase by about 19 billion US dollars. We saw the Japanese Coincident Index tick lower to 107.6, and we saw BOJ release its October monthly report today. Bank of Japan Governor official Kuroda is expected to speak in the U.S. later this week. In Switzerland today, we saw a small move higher in foreign currency reserves. Those came in below expectations. And we saw a pullback in Eurozone Centix investor confidence to 6.1 from the prior reading of 6.5. In Canada later today during the North American session, we're going to receive building permits data and then some minor U.S. consumer credit data later today. Moving on to Tuesday's action, in New Zealand we expect the NZIER Business Opinion Survey, and in the UK we expect RICS house prices and BRC like-for-like sales. Finally, in Japan, we expect the Japanese current account and balance of payment data. Let's go ahead and take a look at some other asset classes, starting with metals. This is a daily chart of gold against the US dollar. We can see gold is currently trading around 13.10 or 13.11 per ounce and is pressured. This follows Friday's price activity where the price of gold also fell. Gold is really taking its cues from the U.S. government shutdown. The longer the shutdown lasts, the greater the likelihood that the Federal Reserve will not be able to taper QE3 during the fourth quarter of 2013, and a possible taper by the Fed is looking increasingly likely for Q1 2014. Much the same story with silver. Silver is trading around 21.72 against the US dollar, even though it is up from last week's intraday low around 20.62. As we can see here from this daily chart, silver is dramatically lower over the past several weeks. Moving over to the energy complex, we have a daily chart of Brent crude futures against the US dollar. We can see that Brent crude is currently trading around 107.57, and moving over to West Texas Intermediate futures on this daily chart, we can see that WTI is currently trading around 102.47. The ongoing shutdown of the U.S. government has resulted in lesser demand for energy products and crude products in the U.S., which is important, of course, because the U.S. is the world's largest consumer of oil. Also, the price of WTI was capped overnight on account of degradation of Tropical Storm Karen. Oil platforms had closed over the weekend in the Gulf, but major production companies have returned to their productive bases following the weakening of Tropical Storm Karen. So that is keeping a lid on some prices as well. Let's go ahead and take a look at some FX activity here today. We can see that the Swiss franc has retraced most of its losses on Friday and is today's number one performer. So the Swiss franc is outperforming the market, followed by the Japanese yen. We can see here that the Japanese yen is stronger against the board, across the board, other than the Swiss franc. It's a challenging day for the Australian dollar, and it is also a challenging day for the New Zealand dollar. So one might construe this as a risk aversion, risk a day, risk off today. Let's go ahead and take a look at some individual currencies. This is a daily chart of the US dollar activity index. You can see the US dollar has a downward intraday bias today. That is primarily as a result of the ongoing situation in the U.S. with regard to the government shutdown. Over the weekend, we had House Speaker Boehner indicate that the U.S. Should not default on its debt. Those were comments that were echoed by Treasury Secretary Lew. We also had some Fed officials speak on Friday who warned that the U.S. should not even contemplate or discuss defaulting on its debt. Of course, U.S. government economic data are going to be held back until the U.S. government shutdown is ended. This is a daily chart of euro against the U.S. dollar. We can see a nice upward bias here today for the euro. We have some remarks expected from Eurozone officials later today. You can see the Euro's gains are taking place even though we saw the pullbacks in the Eurozone Centix confidence earlier today. Moving over to Japan, we see the Japanese yen, as we indicated earlier, has a nice intraday bias and trend higher. It is outperforming almost all of the market. Later this week, as we mentioned, BOJ Governor Kuroda is expected to speak in the U.S. on Thursday. British pound has recovered from its very drastic and sharp sell-off on Friday. The pound has a nice upward trend, intraday bias moving higher. We expect some UK data, as we said earlier, later this week, and the markets will be attuned to anything we expect to hear out of Bank of England this week. The BOE MPC, the Monetary Policy Committee, will deliberate interest rates this week. We do not expect any change in policy. Let's go ahead and take a look at the Swiss franc. This is the Swiss franc's daily activity index. We can see on Friday the Swiss franc had its weakest day here since roughly September 5th. That was mostly on account of announcement from the FINMA, the Swiss Financial Markets Regulator. They indicating they have a widespread multi-jurisdictional investigation going on in the FX markets regarding collusion concerning the fixing of exchange rates. So we will keep our eyes, of course, on that investigation. We can see, however, that the Swiss franc has moved higher today and has retraced most of those losses. We will see a lot of Swiss economic data this week, including consumer price inflation data in that country. This is a daily chart of the Australian dollar. This is the daily activity index. You can see a lot of volatility here in Australia. It almost looks like a double top. Today is a risk-off day, as we can see. The Australian dollar is broadly lower against other currencies. Here is the Canadian dollar daily activity index. We can see on Friday the Canadian dollar had a nice move higher. That was precipitated by a nice increase in the manufacturing employment index to positive territory. However, today it is quite a different story. The C dollar has given back much of Friday's gains and is below water. So a nice downward trend, an intraday weaker bias for the Canadian dollar so far. Finally, this is the New Zealand dollar daily activity index. We can see an awful lot of volatility here, risk on, risk off, risk on, risk off, risk on, risk off, etc., etc. We can see the New Zealand dollar is significantly underwater today. Nice downward bias there. We had Finance Minister English out of New Zealand commenting overnight on the U.S. government shutdown. He indicated it is not good for the New Zealand dollar. Of course, New Zealand policymakers are prone to jawbone to talk Kiwi lower as much as they can. Let's go ahead and take a look at some FX pairs and cross rates. This is a daily chart of the US dollar against the Swiss franc. You can see the US dollar stopped short of testing some short-term support here right around the 90.10 area overnight. Any additional weakness in this major currency pair, we would expect a test of the 89.93, and possibly a test of the 89.66 areas. This is a daily chart of the New Zealand dollar against the Japanese yen. We can see that Kiwi gapped lower on this cross at the open of the week and fell as low as the 80.12 area. So it took out some short-term support around 80.25, hit some stops, and then bounced back above this 80.38 area, which represents Fibonacci level. If we see any additional weakness on this cross, we would expect a test of last week's low, which came in around 79.87, followed by a test about 50 points below that. We'll call it 79.37. That is this red Fibonacci support line here. This is a daily chart of the Australian dollar against the Canadian dollar. We can see that Aussie moved lower to test the 96.88 area earlier today. We have a blue arrow to indicate that move. We can also see that it moved above this 97.16 area here earlier today as well. These represent some short-term Fibonacci levels related to last week's total range, from Monday's low last week to Friday's high. Any additional weakness on this cross, we would expect a test of the 96.66 area, around which area we have some moving averages coming in. We would then anticipate a possible test of the 96.43 and the 96.15 areas. Finally, this is a daily chart of the euro against the British pound. We can see that the euro came off today and tested the 84.49 area as its intraday low. That is right in line with Fibonacci extension area related to Friday's high. Any additional weakness on this cross rate, we would anticipate a test of the 84.41 level, followed by some other key support areas coming in around 84.20 and 84.09. We thank you very much for tuning in to today's Forex and CFD Market Focus Report.